myself, which if you take 5 minutes at some point to answer, that would be great. Now, over to Sebastian, Sebastian Moritz from Moricon to introduce to today's session.
Thank you very much, Dave. Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be part of the webinar today. Quick introduction, Moricon helps developers in their pre-opening phase of a project to define services, amenities, and the daily operation. I stand in the shoes of prospect tenants during the build phase and envision how the project works, operates, and how to create a community. And that involves liaising with architects, designers, trades, and specialty consultants to bring a defined service vision to life. Now, why tenant retention through technology? Rarely tech is meant for the actual tenant, as the trend suggests, and being passionate about service, I thought it is time to talk about. The recent study suggests that a lot of times technology is used for virtual meeting tools, reality building, modeling, and virtual site visits, sensor monitoring, and occupier activities in building, increased home working for guests and tenants in buildings. Rarely the tenant itself is in the central focus of technology, and I think this needs to be changed, and we are very glad to have a great panel to talk about. And if I can ask Stephanie for a very quick introduction, and then we'll just do a round and go on.
Thank you, Seb. We had to have one that was going to be on mute talking, and of course it had to be me. Good morning, everybody. This is Stephanie Smith. I am the Director of Residential and Student Operations for Invesco, and I work across Europe, Nordics, and UK. So thank you very much for having me today. Invesco has a long history of residential, both in North America as well as Europe. And we currently have about 30 properties across Europe, various stages of development through stabilization. And so technology is very much the hot topic for us at any given moment. Thank you.
Fred.
Hi, I'm Fred Lerker-Lerkenborg. I'm the CEO of Lavanda. We are a prop tech company who focuses on flexible rentals, so short and medium term rentals within the build to rent community. And we're currently on a global expansion, available across Europe, Middle East, Australia, and the US right now, and really helping to kind of think through how can flexible rentals really be brought into reality through tech and services as well.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And the only person in our panel who deals with actual tenants on a daily basis, Doug.
Thank you, Seb. Good morning, everyone. My name's Dougie. I am General Manager currently for the Duet apartments in Salford Keys, working for Allsop. Prior to this, I was General Manager over at the Trilogy apartments in Manchester also, and have many, many years of experience in student accommodation and prior to that retail. So yeah, for my whole career, I've been dealing with the frontline service experience, shall we say. So yeah, very excited to take part today.
Excellent, thank you very much. So if I can ask in general for feedback on the general situation of service delivery in the build to rent industry, is what you currently do and have efficient for the site team? And I'll just stay with you, Doug, from the frontline experience.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question actually, because we are, in my opinion, and from experience, we've only scratched the surface of what we can do with build to rent. I think there's a lot of education that still needs to happen on both parts, both from a customer's perspective and also the teams that work on the sites, and actually to educate the customers into what build to rent is, because there's still that whole conversation of when a resident turns up on site for a viewing, that they're blown away because they didn't know about all these additional services and amenities that they're just then shown on that viewing. So I think for me, we do have the platform to provide an amazing service, and I know we're talking about tech today, and actually for me, tech's integral to that customer journey, but also the people are just as important, and it has to be a simultaneous thing for me. They have to work together. So yeah, it's as it stands at the moment, you know, it's been an interesting 12 months for everybody, I'm sure. But it's nice to see the last few months, well, especially the last 6 weeks, things have really started to sort of pick up again. Lots more faces around the community and lots more people around the reception areas and the lounges. So yeah, it's nice to see people again, and I think they've definitely missed that human interaction. So it's yeah, it's really exciting at the moment to get back to some form of normality. We won't say normal, but a version of it, shall we say.
Thank you. Stephanie, from a corporate view, and obviously in your portfolio remit, you have insights on how things potentially are done on the continent. How is your feedback on the general situation?
I think I can look at this in a couple different ways, Sebastian. So, you know, if I think back to my time in the States where I was on site, I was shaping the residents and really looking at the history over there and the resident portals, how they evolved. You know, I think there are definitely some parallel lines that we see as we're coming into UK and a continental view, because, you know, if I think of the difference, so the different approach, you know, what I tend to see is that very much in the UK, much like occurred in the States, the view was always, the focus was very much on taking a look at the prospect journey, as opposed to, you know, kind of there being this little bit of a drop off on the residential side once the person was in the building, with the exception of, can they file a service request? You know, and then I think of how that grew and how it's growing here already. And I think that, you know, COVID, for better or for worse, catapulted that very much so, and allowed us to really think about going past technology for technology's sake, and where we can build value. And that feeds up into the corporate level as well, because one of the big things that we're trying to consider as you know, we're building, whether that's in the UK and Ireland, on the continent, we're taking a look at how our buildings are being used. So, you know, technology is so important in so many ways. I mean, obviously we can learn more about the demographics in our building. We can learn about the communal spaces, how those are being used, what hours people are accessing things, how many packages we're receiving into the building, which then allows us to create better decisions for future properties, and also to adapt our properties as needed, and hopefully in a proactive manner, as opposed to quite reactive when the world starts falling down around us. Now, what I have noticed is that there's a contrast with continental Europe, where there tends to not be as much virtual engagement technology as far as like the prospect journey. Yes, you have a portal, you can take a look and you can put a unit on hold, but then you call. There's again, that drop off, and that personal level comes in play, which I think the personal level should always be there, absolutely. But in continental Europe, it tends to be a focus more on the resident portal, which is different than maybe the UK. I definitely feel like, and a lot of times that's managed actually by a residents group, as opposed to maybe the manager quite as much.
Do you think?
But again, all of those pieces of information feeding into the corporate view and understanding better how our buildings are really operating is so absolutely vital.
Do you think that this is an Anglo-American trait, if you will, being very service focused, but more familiar with technology helping that service request versus on the continent?
I think that, you know, if I think back when I moved here 10 years ago, and, you know, fresh off the plane from, you know, the multifamily universe, and really working with residents and properties every single day, it was, it was a bit of a shock to me. And I very much remember the sentiment in the market, even though there were pockets of people who were very excited about build to rent, understanding what that was going to mean. But actually, it was very much the mindset of, well, people just want a roof over their head, as opposed to, you know what, people want community, they want lifestyle. And I think that maybe that is still kind of where continental Europe is a little bit more. And I do see that changing on some of the new assets, which we're getting into the mobilization period, and some of the things that the residents are looking for. But as this world becomes smaller and people are traveling more and working in other countries more, that's where we need to stay ahead of this curve and really think about the efficiencies that we can create for the site teams, the data that we can collect from our perspective, and then also making sure that our residents are getting the best quality, and really following those different trends. But I do think that the UK probably picked up on that multifamily view quite early, and it makes sense if you think of how close our cultures really are.
Mm-hmm. It's a perfect lead in for Fred, talking about efficiencies for site teams. You are the person who's actually responsible to build some of the software and also in the shoes of a service provider. How are you adapting to that drive in service delivery at the moment?
Yes, I think Steph was kind of saying a really interesting point there about in Europe, I think, and in the UK, for various legacy reasons, and this is not a critique, I think because it's an early industry, a lot of buildings have been turned into build to rent in the first wave that were not built with a sort of a tech vision in reality. They were just buildings that either were coming to fruition at that point in time, or they were sort of retrofitted and redesigned from previous buildings. So maybe they weren't thinking from the ground up tech. The second point is pre-COVID, in some markets, like for example, Berlin, demand is so high that, to be honest, to some degree, you can kind of build it and they will come. You know, there is a certain element there. And if there's rent control, you know, there's a certain incentive mismatch there where people are thinking, actually, just building it, I'll get 97% occupancy. So the whole resident experience becomes a bit of an afterthought of like, is it really worth doing that? I think COVID has fundamentally changed that. Business models have shifted, demand has shifted. You know, people are moving to suburbs, some people are urban, lots of people are moving around. You know, the digital nomad has become a mainstream thing. So all of those shifts are happening quite quickly. So I think in terms of having models that can make efficient use of the buildings, it's become, at least from what I've seen, essential now, sort of mandated from the top down, rather than being sort of an optional, do we need to do this? So that's one element. And the second element, I think, a lot of the first wave of prop tech that came through, probably in the last sort of 5 or 10 years, I think have been too software centric, in the sense of like, oh, we'll build this really cool platform and we'll solve this little thing. And then everybody will of course use it. And the reality is that, you know, site teams are well, Dougie can probably speak much more to this, but are thrown 1,000 platforms. You know, they need to make it all work together. They need to it needs to solve a real pain problem. And unfortunately, there's a bit too much tech in reality that isn't solving a real pain point and isn't necessarily working integrated along with other platforms, which is another crucial element in the backbone, which we could dig into maybe later. But so we combine the tech with services, and that's the way we found the best way to kind of support our clients in optimizing the assets and everything else, but also layer certain services, like for example, revenue management as a service, because you know, in Europe, there isn't a great amount of data, not like the US. The US is super mature in multifamily data, you know, to an almost scary point. In Europe, that's quite early days. So layering in that kind of service on top of the tech can make platforms more, you know, relevant and usable by the site teams who actually are doing the hard work at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Thank you very much, Fred. Just a quick reminder, any questions you have, please use the chat function, and at the end, we'll do our utmost to answer all those questions. There was a recent home views report, the first quarter, and it was a very interesting read. If you haven't done so, please do. It's a really interesting, very informative snapshot on what's happening on the market. And this is from the tenants' view. And one of the points that I found very interesting, the use of online portals is highly rated. But my question is the usage limited just to maintenance or and defect reporting, or are tenants really using such portals? Stephanie, how would you rate the usage of online portals across your portfolio as a strategic tool to improve tenant performance and retention?
I think it's absolutely vital. I mean, one, I am a bit of a tech geek. My background definitely lends to that, but also the resident services part. And so we recognize, that we really need to optimize and really think about the way that we can build these out. So now, in Europe, we have third-party property managers, but what we're trying to do is very much create a baseline of expectation, and we're helping to work with our property managers on some of those different aspects. Yes, there is an element of, in the beginning, I think residents who aren't necessarily used to build to rent, getting them on for putting in a service request, absolutely. But then as they start to see a little bit more about what they can do, so whether that is, a virtual session that they can sign up for, or they want to, during COVID, for instance, we were able to keep some of our communal spaces open on a booking system, so they could actually log in and put their time in rather than having to keep coming down to the front desk and checking on that. We have surveys set up where residents can take those through the portal, or it's coming in via email. And even like package lockers, now having the messages coming across and keeping that as a contact free. Yes, it was really great to have before COVID. Now it's even more essential as is at the forefront of people's minds. But if I think to the way that some of our residents use our portals, even in the States. So for instance, we have a concierge portion of this, which is something that, again, we're working with our property managers to engage with. But in New York, one of our residents can go on and book tickets to a show at a preferred rate. They can go and see the new art gallery opening. And so it's about starting to understand what your residents are looking for and then integrating those. And as Fred says, right now, there are a lot of systems that don't necessarily talk to one another. And what you don't want to do is have your residents logging into your portal, and then they have to go and log into this one over here and then that one over there, because now they need a dog walking service. And, you're referring them over to a business. Looking at how we can actually further these efforts and have those link up a little bit more, I think is really quite important. And even something as simple as signing their renewal online. It just makes sense that we're starting to move more in that direction. And I think that you definitely see a forward-thinking approach in that now more than ever. And as Fred said, we definitely need to make sure that there's an efficiency there for the site teams. Otherwise, they will become very frustrated. They're managing too many different things. They have a triple entry into different systems just to actually get a baseline reading of what their residents want.
Would you standardize your programs across your entire portfolio, or is there a difference between, say, the continental properties you're overseeing and the UK?
I think in general, any property you have, it needs to be slightly tailored. I think it's good to have a consistent baseline, and then you look at the market that you're in, as well as that specific property. But actually, part of our Enstrada brand, part of our Enstrada goal is really to offer, if one of our residents is over visiting from Germany, or they're over visiting from New York, and they want to, book into a great Italian restaurant and go and get tickets, to go and see Wicked or something like that, that they're actually able to do that on that global level. But then we can also personalize it very much so on the property level. And in the background, really have it where that's being contained from controlled and monitored from one centralized location, as opposed to all these individual portals all over the place that you're going to get very disparate information. And again, if you have disparate information, well, you can only make decisions based on the information that you have. And so you kind of have to start looking a little bit more apples to apples. But I think that as the residential profile starts to change and people start to want more and understand the lifestyle, we're going to see definitely that curve more towards, especially on the continent, a lot more about the concierge services as well.
Brilliant. Fred, you're building software for a living. How do you balance your software development needs and what customers are telling you with your customer focus in mind? Because you have then, if you're expanding into Berlin, into the continent or the US, you have a very vast and diverse portfolio of customer structure. how are you envisioning your software planning?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's definitely not easy. I mean, at the end of the day, the customer is the one paying one way or another, right? Indirectly or directly. So it's absolutely crucial to kind of get that kind of feedback. One example in our world is we were kind of weaving in medium and short-term rentals into buildings, but generally we were distributing externally. So we were finding people who, for example, wanted to try before you rent, that kind of phenomena. So people, if you've got a software developer in Barcelona wants to move to London, they grab a build-to-rent asset for a couple of months because they don't know what's going on, then they actually quite enjoy it and they become a long-term tenant. So we saw a lot of kind of externally facing stuff, but then we found tenants in the building were saying, well, actually, we'd really love, like my mum's coming to visit and actually it's a bit uncomfortable. I've got a 2-bed, I don't really have the space. Could I grab another apartment? I can see these are being externally advertised. So that concept is not new. That's very much a US centric idea of kind of guest suites, but that became really, really popular during the pandemic because people were, you know, visiting and supporting family for longer periods of time because of the rules as well. So maybe they were moving for like 2 months to Edinburgh or Germany to try and like look after an elderly family member. So to take a unit in the building became really great. And also people still have some, you know, residing, I don't know whether it's quite mental health, but issues around people kind of living and staying. That's still a sort of residual shadow from COVID, even though it's early days. So people would prefer to kind of book an apartment nearby. And then in terms of when you start to think about it on a global perspective, we see some really interesting trends with some of our partners, some of our big residential asset owners who are starting to create effectively internal clubs where you're part of a build-to-rent community. And if you need to go to Paris for a month, why don't you just take a sister apartment in one of the buildings over there where you know that you can get a similar quality with a different kind of flavor. And we're doing that in student as well, which is really interesting as well. So people staying in the US, in a certain town, they might want to go visit a friend in another, you know, a student town, and they can stay there and kind of almost swap apartments for a period of time. So it's all about really trying to, as much as you can, get that constant feedback, and then think, how are the, you know, secular and kind of temporary things like COVID trends impacting, and be really reactive to that. Because ultimately, if you're solving a problem there, you're probably solving it for someone else globally. And that can be really interesting, particularly as a broad trend, residential owners are increasing their portfolios, right? Almost every big partner like Invesco and others have huge growth plans. So if you can think of something that can solve it for 50% of that portfolio, it's probably going to solve it for the next 50% as well.
And because I found it interesting with the guest suites, and I agree this is getting more and more popular, and is potentially an interesting revenue stream for the operators as well. Do you think then that down the road, sort of home swapping or sharing or time sharing in build to rent is something that you can see and plan for it?
I think you can with the right technology. So I think one of the issues has always been the furnishings and like how you make that split within the building and the investment in that. And this can actually help pay for that. In fact, I think this is something the US is learning from Europe right now, where the US, to the best of my knowledge, is very unfurnished. And now a lot of buildings coming out of the ground have sort of 20% furnished, so they can start to offer to different audiences. And don't get me wrong, the predominant kind of strategy tends to be long-term, but I think if you think about mid-term corporate bookings, all this sort of stuff, as a sort of a third of the building, 20% of the building, whatever is right for the environment, that allows you to do this kind of flexible model. And then when you think on a portfolio level, you can start to swap between it. And ultimately, the point is that the tenant doesn't think of themselves as a 12. No one thinks of themselves as like, I'm a 12-month person. That's not how people think, right? They think, I need to be in Germany for 2 years, or I need to be here for 3 months, and I don't know what's going to happen next. And when people can't solve for that, that's when they get frustrated. And there's nothing worse than, you know, I had to refurbish a home recently, and I ended up having to take a 9-month lease in a different place, but I only needed it for 4 months, but I just had no choice where it was. If I could have gone into a multifamily building and taken that, or, you know, whatever asset for the exact amount of time, that would have been perfect. And I would have paid a premium for that, actually, for that time. So it's really about solving for the emerging demand. And I think everyone, inverted commas, being 12-month cookie cutter kind of people is not realistic anymore. It's just not what the demographics are doing. So I think if you kind of fight that tide, you're gonna lose to other partners who will be more flexible.
Could you see this working for Invesco, Stephanie, that you share basically apartment time or apartments on different locations through a centralized platform in order to keep tenants motivated and brand loyal?
I think that there are a couple different concepts here. So one, I've always been a very big proponent of transfer options for residents. In the States, I had, with one of my past companies, we had a huge coast-to-coast transfer option. And we did work with people flexibly if they needed to take a shorter term lease because they were there on contract, something like that. But also on a guest suite type of situation where somebody's just coming in for a few weeks. You know, I mean, there are people who are in studios and all of a sudden their mom and dad are coming into town and there's no way that they're going to stay in that studio. So, you know, in our take up on our guest suites in the States, I mean, I had I had 1 month where we had an 80% occupancy on that unit, which it was actually quite strong, and it was consistent. And then we had, on the off time, we would use it as a secondary model because it was on an asset that was largely, you know, kind of 96 to 98% occupied at any given moment. You know, but also as far as unit to unit house swapping, that's where it might get a little bit messy, just because obviously you've got your AST if they're on a longer term contract, you know, subletting rules, things like that could get a little bit dicey. But as far as you know, offering these different transfer options, these short stays, you know, and I think that is entirely feasible, and it's something that we can take the best practices from the States and Canada and then actually expand upon that in Europe, and really stay at the cutting edge of that, especially with technology. And, you know, as Fred said, we've already seen it on some of our assets where people have come to stay in one of his apartments. And next thing I know, they came because they were checking out, they were taking a look at some contract work, and all of a sudden they're coming to us going, can I sign a 6-month contract with you? You know, it doesn't. And so I think that there's a win-win situation, because then they're giving referrals over for, you know, Fred's team for their friends to come and stay in those units. So I think that this is just going to be a natural evolution that's going to end up happening, and an expectation. I mean, we are offering lifestyle subscription living on properties. So this just seems to be a natural element of that for me.
Interesting. Doug, you're running one of the successful buildings in the country. I'm sure you have online gadgets everywhere to entertain staff as well as your tenants. But for you in your daily operations, what are the must-haves and the nice-to-have online portal activities or your items that you absolutely love?
Yeah, for me, it's maintenance goes without saying. I think maintenance reporting, defect reporting now, just it's almost, it has to be online. It's and interestingly, if you look at the top 3 or 4 functions of our online portals, they all relate back to communication. Communication, as we all know, is so important to customer service and creating that community, because they're the same thing, you know. And actually, when you look at the next 2, so you look at the bulletin boards is the most used function after the maintenance management. So the residents can speak to each other, speak to the team. And when you look and break that down even further, out the sort of nearly 1,000 postings that we had over the last 12 months, 43% of those were actually asking each other for help or offering help to each other. So you can just see how powerful that tech is in creating community, because I think naturally people will tend to just think of community as physical and, you know, creating a community face to face, when actually a lot of the time it's created through those online platforms. And that's kind of evidence to showcase. One is parcel management, fundamental for the day-to-day operation, and again it's down to communication, but also mitigates risk and also allows us to analyze trends. we can delve into even more data. Look at the fact that 43% of our parcels are Amazon parcels, and we can use that data in whatever way we want to. We can analyze what time parcels are being delivered or collected and make sure we're structured and staffed appropriately. And then on top of that, you've got amenity reservations, which I know Stephanie mentioned earlier, but amenity reservations it's become imperative that we have that function, especially, COVID has kind of enhanced the need for that and encouraged people to use the app a lot more. So it's only accelerated tech, in my opinion, especially from a communication point of view. And actually, we would have struggled without it over the last 12 to 18 months. But yeah, I think for me, it really is about the data. So analysing the data and the trends and the behaviours of our residents to allow us to free up our teams to provide an amazing experience. So that for me is the link. It's making things quicker, smarter and slicker to enable the people to do what they do best and engage. So I think that's from my experience, they're the key points.
And how if you get now this whole treasure trove of data points from across your building, how do you then streamline or dissect in a way that you're future-proofing as you go along?
I suppose it depends on which function we're looking at. If we look at maintenance reporting, for instance, that's really interesting, because we can not only look at what days of the week things are getting, issues are being raised, we can really delve into the detail of what type of issues they are, whether they're plumbing or electrical, which contractors we will need to get in on which days. And also at the end of the day, that it's more cost effective. We can plan plan which day of the week our maintenance manager is in, because we know that more maintenance requests are raised on a Sunday, for instance, as an example. So really, it comes down to service, but also it's cost savings, and it means that we can budget appropriately for the next year. We can literally break down every single maintenance issue that's been raised and associate a cost to that, which will allow us to then really forecast appropriately for the next year. So I think that's integral really for us is that maintenance reporting.
It's amazing, yeah. This forward maintenance processing. It's similar to lifts, where people basically dial into your lift technology and tell you we fixed something before you actually knew that there was an issue. And I think this is more into the AI part. We talked about community, and obviously tenants form a community, and it's great when you see in times like ours with COVID, that there is still a very strong drive for community within a building where people want to help each other. I found in the same Home Views report quite extraordinary. Only 10% of the surveyed tenants mentioned the benefits of community, and that raises the question, where does development money for those programs need to be spent? Is this just a fluke that only 10% felt compelled to answer that question? But for the developers in the panel, Fred, how do you plan your pipeline in regards to addressing community, to offer something to a potential client, a solution that integrates your people, the tenants, more into the building in order to make them more brand loyal?
Yeah, I think your last couple of words there are key to some degree. So, because I think community is it's quite a nebulous concept, and it can mean different things to different people. Like, in terms of what is community? Is it offline, online? Is it demographics? Is it diversity? Is it, so there's a lot that's very hard to standardize in that. But I think one of the strongest things that we've seen is that when people feel that they are loyal to a brand and the brand is doing something for them, that becomes a badge of kind of honor of being part of that building, and that the building is then giving something back to them, and they are a part of that. And I think if you can then elevate that to a sort of more than one building, so it becomes a sort of a club, you know, in terms of like a membership program where you are part of multiple buildings and you can then stay in those in different places, that becomes really crucial. So from our perspective, we see it's really important to increase diversity within the buildings. That creates an interesting building. So for us, we focus a lot on reaching a lot of different channels, where you get, for example, a lot of international people coming abroad who want to stay for periods of time. They will be searching from abroad in their own native channels. And if you don't tie all those together with a common brand narrative, they're never going to find your place, or they're going to struggle at, or they'll end up coming through a third party, where they might come through an estate agent or you know, maybe even in their country or looking externally, but they'll not understand that they're engaging with, you know, ultimately an Invesco asset, for example, or you know, so they'll kind of have a disconnected understanding of what the proposition is from the build to rent. So part of the evolution where we're going is actually increasingly just becoming the tech. And as we see, because one of the big trends we see is that build to rent is increasingly bringing in hospitality people who are thinking about tenants, customer experience. From it's sort of feels like a bit of a movement from at least where we're standing. And I think those people will increasingly want to present their brand on all these different channels and own that whole brand journey. And therefore, you know, our technology is all about connecting up all those little threads. But if you're sitting in Hong Kong and you're on Agoda, you want to be able to book almost as good an experience as being next door and walking into Dougie's building. But you need to feel that you're joining that club, and then you're part of that club throughout the entire branded experience of being there. And if you want to move away, the first thing you should think is, can I be part of the same building complex but somewhere else? So that, you know, that connectivity and ultimately sort of making the client's brand shine throughout all of that is key for us to make people feel that everything is part of that, if that makes sense.
So it's just basically a hotel concept, right? Where you have the big brand loyalty programs from, say,
Exactly.
Bonvoy, Marriott, or Hilton Honors, and it doesn't matter where you are, someone is helping you according to the brand guideline because you're supportive of that.
Exactly. I actually think that's exactly right. The hotel philosophy, if you can feel like every time you walk into a Invesco asset, you know, Investcom, the slippers are the same, you know, you know, the feeling is the same, the hospitality experience is the same, whether you're in New York or London or Berlin. You know, not everybody wants to go in that direction, but I think if you go in that direction, you can create a real feeling of community and being part of that club. And I think also that appeals to those demographics who are, you know, also willing to fund that, because one of the key problems is, how do you fund community? You know, it shouldn't just be like a drinks budget for the monthly meetup. Like, that's just always going to be a token effort.
What's wrong with
that's
that?
what it is. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think if it becomes self-generating and people say, hey, you know what? I don't know, I'm speaking for Steph, but Steph can say, hey, look, 1% of my returns came because of this brand added thing, then she's going to go and invest more money into that, and that will go in a circular story there, and will generate more investment in community as a hard concept, I could imagine.
Which is the perfect lead in, Stephanie. Will a tech-back community drive from Invesco for you create a more competitive advantage? And if so, what sort of activities do you envision to push tech into your community building and creating, brand loyal tenants?
Yeah, I think that there are a couple different approaches that we need to consider here. So, I mean, a basic need for any human being is to feel like we're part of something bigger, right? And maybe that's very philosophical, but if you think about somebody's home, and that's really what we're developing here. It's not just a pretty tower or a nice garden style community. It's actually somebody's home. And it's about creating an atmosphere where they feel safe, they feel comfortable. So, I think that's where we need to think about our definition of community. So one of the things that I love about our team, even though, yes, we're an investment house, we create these great buildings, we look at them very much about that it is about the overall community. So it's not just the property and what we have on the ground floor or wherever we have the amenity located in the building. It's actually about how we also engage with the greater community. So, you know, I think to how we build value out of these portals as we're implementing them. So, you know, a resident, maybe in their mind, they're like, oh, the portal's just for the maintenance service request, but that actually could be part of the problem. If the teams don't have the right pieces to put in to get people to engage within there. So, you know, having information about your local area, working with the local businesses, supporting those smaller local businesses, especially right now. I mean, think about how much they're all hurting. If you know that there's a great privately owned, you know, pet shop down the street, or, you know, a really great restaurant in the neighborhood. So you're actually helping to market for them. They're then providing services for your residents, having that information on the portal so people are actually engaging with those businesses. You know, I think that's actually really quite important. You know, thinking about, you know, also our social responsibilities, whether that is to, you know, local food shelter, places like that, you know, so because it's about that bigger feeling, it's about home, it's about your neighborhood, and then yes, inherently you will get neighbors who start to know one another. You know, we empower them. We build these really great amenity spaces. Sometimes we're very light on amenity, but actually you can really get residents engaged through, you know, it could be through a dashboard where they can log in and talk to one another. Somebody can say, oh, you know, services swap. I'm great with computers. I need somebody to help me fix my bike. You know, maybe they're not mechanical. So those little pieces of engagement that get people talking. I mean, we had one of our properties with one of my past companies where somebody went on and started a book club. Another one actually went on and started a Dungeons and Dragons group. I mean, like, you never know what you're going to see on these pages. And it's so great to see how people interact and finding birds of a feather so that they can then create their, you know, kind of sub communities within. And as far as the portals, I think, you know, the home views finding is interesting because part of it is our education for our residents and letting them know what they can expect out of build to rent. And I know this is a massive debate with everybody all the time. We have roundtables and we discuss it all the time. But actually, how are we getting that word out about what they can show? And actually, what are we doing as far as starting to combine that person-to-person interaction that is so absolutely vital when somebody's walking in the building or we're engaging with them for a service request, you know, actually starting to support that and make it really well known of, hey, did you know that you can go onto the portal and you can take a look at that? I know that you love your dog, and we've got this great new local, you know, they're doing these homemade dog biscuits or whatever the case may be. You know, so I think that's where we need to start thinking about that optimization of technology to still provide that personal service. As far as brand loyalty, I do think that it's really important. I mean, when I was back in the States, I worked for a group that we had that coast to coast transfer. And some of my properties in Colorado, we'd get a lot of people moving from our assets in San Diego or New York. And they used to say, you know, and part of it was the communication, again, you know, making sure they knew that they had this option, but they used to say, oh no, I know that I've had really good experiences on your properties over there. Can I move over here? And working with them, giving them some little perks, you know, as far as that transfer option. We're actually already seeing that. In fact, on one of our assets, which APO manages, they have their property in Hayes that they managed for us. And actually one of our residents was moving across town, so couldn't stay in the same asset. They ended up moving over to our brand new barking asset that we just launched because they came in and knew that it was the same team. Next thing we know, we have that brand loyalty. And so it's about that personal, it's not about the name on a building. It's about the feeling and the engagement from the site teams. And so I think that that's actually where that brand loyalty lies, and making sure that our vision up here, you know, and as we're developing these buildings, that we really have the site teams that are embodying that actually on the properties. As far as some extra technology that we are implementing right now, you know, we recognize that we do have some residents who stay shorter term or maybe are going to their first place. So maybe they don't necessarily have the money to go out and buy the Dyson or something like that. So we're actually looking at lockers, which we've trialed actually over in the States, and we saw really good success. So we're actually putting those into some of our properties to trial here, where a resident can come down and maybe they need I don't know, hiking gear for the day, or maybe they want to borrow, you know, on one of our coastal properties, maybe they're borrowing a set to go out to the beach with, or they just need a basic package. They need to go and borrow a vacuum cleaner for the afternoon. They can actually, you know, have that service that's there, as opposed to maybe having to dish out all of that money up front. So, you know, I think there are a lot of different creative ways we can do it. I know Dougie mentioned the package lockers. I think that those are absolutely vital. You know, and even just our surveys, and you know, you talk about how we gauge resident interest. You know, we are very proud to partner with a well-known North American survey group who have expanded over here now, and you know, they very much give us a lot of insight into our residents' experience, and we track that. We look at it on a weekly basis. How are we doing on service requests and all of that? So I think, you know, there are some really good points that all of us have raised, and I think that we just have to keep an eye on keeping it simple, because we're not going to get people engaged if we don't keep it simple. And that's not just for the resident, it's also for the site teams. So I can't stress that part enough. So I will be quiet because I'm sure that Dougie has plenty to say on that as well.
Yes, Dougie, your tidbits of day-to-day frontline experience, what stands out for you?
Yeah, to be honest with you, there's I just need to echo, you know, a lot of Stephanie's points there. You know, just to carry on the philosophy as well. People remember how they felt, and you know, that's really, really important. And for me, again, just touching back on the interpretation of community, I think for me, when you and I know you referenced the home views survey, 10% people mentioned community. If you dissect the 58 reviews that Duet have got, for instance, which of course I have, it's 56 of them, so 97% have mentioned the team or the community.
Great.
And the team is where the community is driven from. That, you know, the team are the drivers of that. So if people may not mention community directly, because I don't think that's necessarily a normal thing for a resident to do. I think what they will see is how amazing they felt, how the team have been, how quickly they've been responded to, which is another huge part of the service, is the communication and how, you know, they get a response. That for me is all community. So actually, if you, and that's my interpretation, but that would mean, to flip that on its head, that 97% of people do reference community. So I think it's interpretation. I think that the key point is that the tech allows the community to thrive. And I know I've mentioned it already, but the tech is smart, the tech is quick, and it will just naturally improve the experience, which will in turn improve the feeling for the resident. So yeah, I think again, has to go together. And
brilliant. It wouldn't be a tech through retention or tenant retention through technology webinar if we didn't show a little bit of tech. I have a very small short video clip about a possible tool that helps community as well as the tenants. So bear with me for a moment, sharing my screen.
Welcome to ResiSettle and a quick overview how this concierge-moderated order platform works. The screen is fully customizable with the client's font, logo and color scheme to allow the app to match the branding. Once you receive the invitation code, you simply download the app from the App Store and enter the code. This is the only time you require a code. Once active, the app sits behind your mobile's complex security structure, for example face recognition, biometric scan, or a simple passcode. You are now at the welcome screen. Any language or font can also be customized to match your branding. In the upper right corner, you see the icons for profile and shopping and all the available services. The profile page captures your main contact details and is managed via the concierge. The shopping basket stores all your pending and fulfilled orders. The tenant can select from the concierge curated list regardless if he or she is at home, for example laundry. The principle is very much like being a hotel guest. You select the item in quantities by checking the appropriate boxes, and you're done. Let's send out a suit and a few shirts. All items on the list are based on your supplier's offering and can be customized. I then can choose how pickup and delivery is managed or any other extras offered. Again, fully bespoke as per the client's requirements and your supplier. If you live in a very posh place and like certain items to be picked up or delivered to an apartment, checking one of the two boxes will authorize
So much for technology. And this is just a small sample how a tech tool can actually try to bind community as well as the local high street together. And for the last couple of minutes, just a quick view on how to innovate whilst keeping the cost in check. Do you believe that the customers should demand better systems or different integrations going forward? Very quickly, Doug from the operations.
Sorry, just muted myself. No, I think that we, I keep referring back to people, but I think the tech, it can get better. Of course it can, and it will improve naturally, but it ultimately needs the person at the end of it, because we have some amazing technology already out there. People can book a service, they book a service, and they will still want to come and speak to somebody physically just to confirm that service is booked, and that again just creates that experience. So yeah, for me, I think we just need both.
Thank you. Stephanie, how will you keep the tenant satisfaction going forward in your forefront?
I think it's a matter of working with our providers that we have. We have some really great tech providers who have some quality systems out there, and it is about, as I said, creating those efficiencies, creating the simplicity, having kind of one stop for the residents and for our site teams, but still having all of these different pieces that might need to fit together a bit like a puzzle in the background. I think it's really important that we track the progress of these, and that we're talking to our residents and actually hearing what they expect. So, I mentioned the surveys earlier, and I know that, Kingsley's been essential in that, asking those questions about what people do expect on the properties, what their experience was as they engaged so far. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a matter of also really big part of that is the reporting behind it. And coming together as peers, as opposed to maybe as competitors, friendly competitors, but competitors nonetheless, and all of us having, rather than always looking for something bespoke, looking at how we can have an agreement on what we need out of these, because we're all using mostly the same providers, let's be honest, but we're all asking for different things from them. So therefore, that's going to hinder their ability to create a really quality product that will work for the entire market. Yes, it's great to have some signature elements, but are we shooting ourselves in the foot by saying, no, I need something totally different than everybody else? You look at the US market, and part of the reason it advanced so much was because there was an element of people banding together through the apartment associations, much like UKAA, and having these roundtables, discussing what we need out of these systems, and then working with those providers and educating them on what our residents want. Because realistically, Fred may not necessarily know what our residents want completely from the full picture. He knows maybe what some of his guests might need. But actually, if we're going to look at expanding those services, even within the big tech companies, I think there needs to be a bigger willingness to maybe create some of those APIs, to create some of those efficiencies. I don't want to be controversial here, but I think that that's a really important element of this. And if we're going to keep the progress moving as we have over the past couple of years, I think that that's going to be an essential part of it.
Fred, your last words for satisfaction demands innovation all the time. What do you say?
Sure. I think actually the point that I would land from this is more for the providers and the buyers of the tech, is that I would be very, if you want a thriving tech community, particularly smaller companies who are starting out now, the biggest problems they have is integration alongside the other big channels. So particularly the core property management systems. And as Stephanie was saying, the reporting element, because if they can't integrate, they struggle to like get it all to work in terms of the reporting. But every new company can easily set up these APIs, which means that they can connect from their side. But one of the problems is that you have these big tech companies, I'm not going to name them particularly, but I could do, but who for very understandable reasons to protect their own value, have decided to kind of put very, very big barriers around them. But unfortunately, what happens is they're not necessarily fantastic at some small niche, right? Whether it's the dog walking app or the whatever app, and somebody else actually would do that better. So if it was an open community and people could kind of upload effectively like App Store, people are willing to rev share and all that kind of stuff. But if it was a more open playing field, what I suspect you'll find is it'll be easier to adopt new tech companies. There'll be more new tech companies because they'll be faster to move. And it's probably, in my mind, the biggest blocker of innovation in prop tech is the sort of integration landscape you have to fight for. And there's a curve where, like, we're lucky enough that we now got the scale that we can start to like break into some of these barriers. But it took us a very, very long time to kind of get to that point. And we had a lot of very, kind early partners who had to deal with some horrible integrations because we weren't at that stage. But I've seen too many really interesting, like tenant-facing prop tech companies kind of wither because they couldn't break through the barriers. So I think it's in everybody's interest, maybe not the big tech, but actually I think people are moving away from those as they're called PMSs if they don't open up. So I think it's time for that ecosystem to open up, and that will allow adoption and a more thriving community, which would be good for everyone.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Time is up. I have not seen any open questions, which it is 11 o'clock. I think we are bang on time. I'm very glad that the concierge seemed to stay on. You need the human face to manage all the technology and to bind the community upstairs and downstairs together. I think there will be amazing new technologies coming towards us. Stay tuned. Thank you very much. Thank you, UKAA, Dave, for having us. It was a great pleasure talking to all of you. Thank you very much.
Just echo what Seb says. Thank you all for joining us. There's lots more webinars coming up.